clear, Bob, that that people should shop for democracy when they're voting. Your voting is your own personal thing, and who you're going to vote for, that should be your business. What we should be talking about is what are we getting, and how they're going to give it to us. And that's what we should be talking about, because that's what everybody else does, instead of worrying about, oh, I'm going to vote for this guy because I don't like so-and-so. Forget about that. We need to vote, shop for democracy. What are we getting? What are we asking the 77-year-old man to do for us? And how is he going to do it? That's what we should focus on. Oh, I'm voting for him as opposed to Trump. It doesn't matter. You vote for whoever the hell you want. You can go in there and vote for your toenail. You can take a crayon and go in there and vote for anything you want. That's the way the game goes. What we should be continually to encourage each other to ask for what we want and ask them how are we going to get it. And like you said, we got 6 months to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to Sanders? I mean, is he no more? He's no longer on the in the conversation.
He dropped out. He dropped out, Wally. He dropped out, and he's endorsing Biden. Again, we got to be smart. What are we getting, and how are they going to do it? If you go and read Joe Biden's page to see what he says he's going to do for African Americans, there's no numbers in it. And everything he says and all the stuff in this that's in there, we've heard it before. There's no how I'm going to do it, and there's no what, and there's no numbers. And I'm thinking that we should be more pragmatic and figure out what are they going to do for us and how they're going to do it. And I would submit, for my first two things is, I think it should be universal income and affordable health care. And people can add whatever they want because the
universal broadband. Universal broadband.
Well, I like universal income myself, Stu, but I like
well, they're not mutually exclusive.
No, they're not. None of it's mutually.
You said add, not or. I'm adding.
No, none of it's exclusive. I'm just adding my two things that I like, and I think that's what people should be doing. They should be discussing the things that they think should be on the platform, because if we give him the platform, then he's got to go in there and do it if he wants our vote. Instead of worrying about him giving somebody a job. It's nice that he's going to give somebody a job or a black lady a job. That's nice. But we need to know what the black lady's going to do when she get the job. How you going to do it? What are we getting? And how you going to do it? I learned that from Wally.
Well, you guys
notice I'm way behind time in this conversation, so don't get it from me.
No, Bob, Wally, I'm saying that what it is that we're doing and how we're going to do it, that's universal. So those particular things, when you want to get something done and people need things or people want certain things, they should do that. We spent a lot of time over the last 50 or 60 years, and you got people worried about how bad Donald Trump is. All of them, we can find bad in everybody. If you're looking for bad, you can find it. And there's a reason why we as a people are still here. So I'm saying that we should be a little smarter this time and figure out what is it that we want and how are they going to give it to us. And nothing's off the table. As the student brought up, nothing's off the table. Everything's on the table. We should be discussing all those things. The jail situation, all kinds of things that people are concerned about, they should be laid on this cat's table, bro. And you should not be concerned about, we vote for him because we don't like Trump. I'm saying, F that, we should be voting our interests. And Bob's right, whether or not you're going to vote for him or not, it doesn't matter. Everybody votes in secret. So who you're going to vote for is one thing, but everybody can join in on what they think should be on the platform. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who will be saying, we can't get this, we can't get that, and that's fine. But
let me just chime in, Doug. I agree with you 100%. And I also just want to pick up on something that Bob referenced, and that is, if we don't do this, if we don't get him to endorse the things that we want, when first we got to say what that is, and then he's got to do it. And if that doesn't happen, Black folk are not going to be excited about this election.
That's good. That's good.
It's not good. It's not a given that the Democrats are going to win. And if they don't excite us by embracing the things that we demand, the things that we're going to get started soon. Just waiting for a couple more folks to sign in.
I'll happily stand by.
Okay. Hi, Joyce. Hi, Dave.
Hi.
Hello, Barack.
Hi.
I always like having things like conservative Republicans making the points I want to make. Often I'm far out.
Good evening, everybody.
Welcome. What should we be talking about?
We've got a whole agenda. Stuart, if you're talking, you're muted.
Thank you for that, Greg. Let me just introduce our whole symposium here. This is the New York City Community Network Symposium on where we're dealing with some of the aspects of community networks and public and affordable housing communities here in New York City. I'm Stu Reed. I'm one of the co-hosts and co-moderators, along with Mr. Greg Shatton, who is also moderating along with me. Greg is a fellow ISOC member and president of the New York City chapter. He's a partner with Moses and Singer, and he's a longtime ICANN member and avid advocate for the internet is for everyone. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Stu, and welcome. Thank you for the kind introduction.
Absolutely. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Greg, for our first panel on basically what are community networks, what are they all about, and I'll just turn it over to you. Go, Greg.
Thank you, Stu. Well, that's a very good place to start. Clearly, we have to define what community networks are. There may be a great deal of understanding among those on the webinar, but nonetheless, we should go into it. I am your moderator, so you don't really want to hear from me. You really want to hear from the people on the panel. We have 3 distinguished guests, and I don't use that term lightly. First, David Burstein, who is a longtime journalist and advocate for internet equity, and you know, a real searcher for truth in the internet space, and it's you know, truly a pleasure to have Dave here. Will not be dull. We also have Barak Otieno, who also participates in ISOC, Internet Society Matters. He is not merely a participant, he is an instructor. He is a sage. He is the ISOC Community Network instructor. And so we will definitely, you know, hear some wisdom from Barak. Last but not least, and first in the alphabet, Joyce Adewumi, who is the founder and president of the New York African Chorus Ensemble, and also the vice president of the 30th Precinct Community Council. So someone who combines arts and community activism, which is a great combination. As a musician myself, I am very much a supporter of that combination, and hope that I can do half as well as any of these panelists at any of the things that they do. So without further ado, I will turn it over to the panel to discuss not just what community networks are, because that's the simple part, but why community networks. What is their value? What do they bring to the table? Why not just big internet service providers? Dave Burstein, I'm going to turn it over to you first. Remember, we only have about 15 minutes.
So I'll keep it quick and go right to the point. You guys can talk about community networks versus providers and so on just fine. I can bring something that's really amazed me lately. I was in a Columbia University webinar with David Reddle, who I've known for more than a decade. We are on the opposite side of politics. He was Donald Trump's first head of the NTIA, which deals with ICON, the internet spectrum, and things like that. My politics are to the left, but So I was really amazed because I've long said we've got to get everybody connected, to hear David say the exact same thing. What David said was that it's become obvious to just about everybody, even people in Washington who resisted it, that it's right to find a way to get everybody connected. I wasn't expecting that from a conservative Republican whose friend, Ajit Pai at the FCC, has not done a very good job of getting Lifeline and other services working better. I hope that David is typical. And I'm actually very pleasantly surprised how many people agree with him. I expected Minion Clyburn, who's always been a progressive voice at the FCC, to speak of connecting anything. But she got to join her in editorial Robert McDowell, again, a conservative Republican, former FCC commissioner, and their editorial made the same point. We have to find a way to connect everybody, and that's what I've long believed in. So let me pass it on to the next speaker.
Thank you, Dave. And you may just want to adjust your camera unless you're on your ceiling. Joyce, I'm going to turn to you next for your perspective.
Well, you know, if we go to traditional African community, the town crier was the community, was the connector, the community network, you know. So it shows the importance of having a medium through which everyone can have information, resources that they need. So definitely, community network is important in this day and age, because we're no longer living in a village, a smaller village, but we're living in a larger area mass. And it's important for everyone to have access to information that is in the community. It builds unity. It helps people to collaborate. It helps people to connect to resources. It helps people to know what's in the community, who's in the community, and where people can go to for help. Community network is vital to our existence. So I don't want to take up too much time because you said we only have 15 minutes, so I'm shortening it.
Thank you, Joyce. I'm sure we'll have a chance to come back around for another set of brief remarks. But Barak, I'm going to turn it over to you. Maybe talk a little bit about what community networks are. We've been talking about the why. Of course, I'll let you talk about the why as well.
Thank you very much, Greg and Stuart, for having me on this symposium. I hope I'm audible enough.
You look fine.
Thank you very much. I would simply define community networks as networks for the people, by the people. And looking at it from a global South context, it's interesting when we started the course, Stuart was bringing out the fact that connectivity challenges are not just an issue of the global South, but that there are also communities in the developed world that still have challenges. Basically, they are underserved. With respect to what a community network is, in the global South, we are seeing cases of underserved communities taking things into their own hands by coming up with models that determine how much they pay for internet connectivity. Most of them can afford to pay probably $10 to $15 a month, which is slightly way beyond what commercial operators normally provide. So we've seen an upsurge of community networks within the small communities where different people live. So in a nutshell, I would say that community networks are networks for the people, by the people, using cooperative models to make sure that they have internet access that they can afford on a monthly basis. To touch on a comment that has been made by the previous speaker, I was once in the Egyptian Museum, I think 2 or 3 years back, and I remember coming across one of the practices of the Egyptians where they had a notice board of sorts, a rock at the center of the village on which they would write upcoming meetings and information that was relevant to the community. So I believe this is not something new, but it's something that has just evolved over time as technology has kept changing. Thank you.
Let me ask Barack, what time is it where you are?
It's actually 4 a.m. in the morning.
You're in West Africa?
I am in East Africa, in Nairobi, Kenya.
I see the KE after your name for Kenya. I
Yes.
think that sets the conversation nicely for a last little bit. You know, as you mentioned, the global South, in a sense, is even in the North. Maybe in New York, it's north of 96th Street or north of 110th Street, or north of Randall's Island in the South Bronx, where my wife happens to work. There are places where there is no internet connectivity at all. There are places where there is no broadband connectivity. There are places where the connectivity is ridiculously expensive because we essentially have a near monopoly system. One cable company, one phone company, and a little bit around the edges. So self-help is really the order of the day, and taking advantage of the existing communities, as Joyce mentioned, to use the community to bring the internet to the community, to my mind, is a really powerful model. In New York, we have one blessing, which has turned out to be a curse during the pandemic, which is we have density, and density is really helpful for networking. We have mesh networks. We have networks that cover housing projects, which can hold thousands and thousands of people. And we don't have to cover big empty spaces. But let me turn back around to the panel for some very brief closing remarks. Joyce, I'll turn to you first.
Okay. Community networking, as I've said before, is definitely important. I think it's a disservice to the country if things are not put in place to ensure that everyone has access to broadband, because that means that they don't have access to resources that would make their life better. That means they don't have access to, emergency personnel when there's trouble. So a country that really wants to succeed and have the interests of its citizens at heart must ensure that everyone is connected to the broadband. Everyone is able to communicate and able to see and hear what's going on in the country, and no matter where they may be within that country, because everything that happens, whether in the South or the North or West, it affects everyone. Look at this pandemic, for instance. If there are people who didn't know what was going on, and they were on the beaches, because maybe they didn't have internet. Our seniors, many of our seniors don't have access to the internet. So many of our seniors did not even know. Many of them went out, and did different things, just lived a normal life. And of course, they were infected. So for the safety of our people, communication is so important. Education is so important. And this is a way of getting the information and education to everyone in the country through internet, broadband. We must do this. We must make sure that no one is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. Barack, a few seconds of wisdom.
I totally agree with Joyce. In fact, we need to take it a notch higher. We have close to 4 billion people that are not connected to the internet, and it really doesn't matter whether they are in the global north or in the global south. I think whichever means will make sure that we connect the unconnected to the internet. We have to pursue it with zeal, and Community Network presents us with a good option at the moment that is affordable to the masses. And so by all means, we need to embrace community networks.
Thank you, Barack. Dave, I'll give you the last word.
And I'll keep it really short. 200 meters from where I am, there was a tent hospital set up in Central Park. New York was the epicenter. I suspect we have far more cases than Nairobi did, showing just how limited sometimes the US is. The rate is now down 80%. It wasn't easy. It hasn't been fun to stay home for 2 months. But sometimes that's what you have to do, and that's what good leadership will make us do. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. And I would say that those 2+ months have pointed out that in no way is the internet a privilege. It is a right. It is a necessity. It has become the fabric that binds us together. We have 1 million school children in New York. Took a little while, but Department of Ed has given out over 260,000 internet-enabled devices, because otherwise those kids would not have had a device to connect to the internet, maybe other than one phone in the family. And of course, a phone isn't much good for learning. So the message, that we're taking at this time is that there is no more important time to continue moving forward and building and embracing the community network model. Stuart, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, I want to thank you, Greg, and thank our panelists. Thank you, Barack, for dialing in from the other side of the planet and being up so early in the morning and joining us. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Joyce. We'll be hearing back from you in a later panel. And thank you, Dave. Okay, I think we are now moving to, let me just see if I can bring in a couple of the folks. We are now moving to the session. Panel number 2, is internet access an essential community service? Should there be universal broadband? And, we kind of touched on this in the first panel, but I think we're going to expand a little bit. Let me just introduce our distinguished panelists. We have Ms. Diana Blackwell, who is the president of Fred Samuel Houses, which includes 47 residential and senior housing apartments in central Harlem. Ms. Blackwell is also the president of PSA 6 Community Council. And we're also joined by Ms. Polly Spain, who's the founder and president of the Federal Aid Housing Group on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Spain is also a member of Community Board 9 in Manhattan and a professional educator with the New York City public school system. Welcome to you both.
Hello, glad to be here.
Great.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we did. Yes, we can hear you fine. Our topic for this panel is internet access essential? And a corollary question is, should there be universal broadband? And let me just kind of throw out a personal a piece of history. My partner Doug Frazier and I, this is going back almost 10 years ago when Eliot Spitzer was a governor of New York. New York State had a policy, had a program, I should say, for universal broadband. And they put out a series of RFPs for folks that will provide universal, essentially free broadband access to communities in the state. We weren't initially accepted, our proposal, which we thought was quite extensive and powerful, focused on New York City public housing. But when Governor David Patterson came in shortly thereafter, somehow our proposal got resurrected and we were funded by the state to provide universal access to folks in public housing in the Bronx and Harlem and Brooklyn. And we thought it was an incredible, incredible thing. And unfortunately, when the new governor came in, our current governor, that program was pulled. Don't know why, but I just kind of wanted to set the table It's not a new concept. It's been around, but it's still ever so critical. And I'm wondering what you ladies think about the necessity for universal broadband.
Okay, well, from my perspective, I feel that it's very vital and important because especially now with this pandemic crises, I know that I have worked with Digital Divide since 2011, and I'm so glad that I was introduced to you and your partner, Doug Frazier, back in 2011 as a resident leader of a NYCHA public housing development here. And when you and Doug first spoke about Wi-Fi networks, Wi-Fi access, you know, what we are able to do as far as putting in a service whereupon residents in public housing could access health services, you know, services as far as getting information when it comes to job training and other tools. I knew back then, and that's almost 10 years ago, how important it is for us to be connected as far as communication, being able to access resources. So when we set up our network here within WISE Consolidation, it did so much to improve our lives. And now more than ever with this crisis, we are really capitalizing on being one of the pioneers and making sure that public housing residents in our community here in Manhattan, you know, have access to free, I want to say again, free Wi-Fi service. So we're using it right now, you know, for emergency services. Seniors are communicating. For those who can't get out, who are secluded, so to speak, who have no family, no one, we're able to reach out to them faster and easier and get them the help that they need. So I am so glad that you and your partner, Doug Frazier, were visionaries in making sure that there is universal internet access in underserved communities within public housing.
Thank you, Molly. I mean, we have been working together for some time, and it's been a pleasure working with you. I want to circle back and talk with you a little bit about schools and what's going on now, but let's hear from Diana first.
Okay.
Well, good evening, and thank you for hosting this. I want to say special thank you to both you and Doug. It's been a great pleasure working with you, and I look forward to the future, which is going to be exciting. Well, regarding universal broadband, I'm looking at it from both urban as well as rural, because it has to be universal. It can't be just one place and not the other. And we're not talking about just broadband. We're talking about high speed connectivity. We have in the low income area had this disparity from the very beginning, whether it's health, whether it's economic, whether it's social. There's an inequality, and it looks like it continues when we talk about internet activity and accessibility. It is something that really needs to be addressed on a larger scale. We're starting it here locally, but it must continue and it must reach those in power, because it is something that in order for us to keep up with the times, such as what we're going through right now, we must have a definite broadband.
You know, we're going to hear a little bit later from Brother Leroy, who I see is in the studio waiting to come on. He hosts a program called The Wisdom Table. And one of his featured guests that we've had a number of times, I think, Polly, you may have seen her at one of our webinars, Dr. Velva Bowles. And she's a scientist, PhD and MD down in Louisiana. And in an interview about a month and a half ago, shortly after the pandemic broke out, Brother Leroy asked her, what was the most important thing that we needed to help fight this pandemic? and the first thing out of this physician's mouth was broadband for everyone.
Mhm.
And I didn't disagree. I was a little surprised that she said that, but clearly access to information, the resources, to knowledge about what's going on, keeping up to date with things is so critical. So I just want to throw it back to Polly. Polly, I know you're a professional educator here in New York City and involved with special needs children as well as others. And what's been your experience, particularly given the last 3 months where kids have had to go online? How has the lack or availability of broadband impacted that from your perspective?
Well, it's been challenging for our students, especially students, again, who are economically challenged. One thing the Department of Education did was offer equipment that was loaded with internet access, because we had to really go into remote learning within 72 hours, within 3 days, okay? Mm-hmm. So there was a challenge for the staff because we had to embrace a platform within that 3-day period. And then the students as well had to learn how to navigate the internet and use the application. We're using Google Classroom right now. And also we're using Zoom again. But what I found is, again, the whole key is, the parents are out of work. Even prior to the pandemic, internet for them was an expense that they really couldn't afford, okay? So now that it's the necessity in regard to education and remote learning, it's crucial now that every student within the public system here in New York City, education system rather, has access to Wi-Fi, because what good is the equipment if you don't have Wi-Fi access? So now it's a tool. It's no longer a luxury. It's a necessity. And I just got off a call with our State Attorney General, Letitia James, and our State Senator, Benjamin Bryan. And I just want to share with you the fact that they too see a need for allocating funds for, again, universal broadband access for everyone, because as they both said, this is the new normal now. We're not going back to the way things used to be. Not only with education, but with jobs as well. One of the things that they were talking about is transportation, right? And how are people going to get back to work? And one of the things that was stated is that not everyone needs to use mass transit to go to work. We have to figure out a way where those people who can stay home and work from home. So, but that can't happen, again, if there's a digital divide, especially in our communities of color, okay? So now everyone has to figure out, what are we gonna do in September, okay? So it's been challenging just getting everyone kind of used to the new normal, but I see this going on, for the next year or two, at least. There will be a hybrid education system here in New York, and we are the largest public school education system in the country. So everyone's going to look to us to see what we do. So we'll have to lead the charge. But one thing that they both spoke about is that we must look at funding for equipment and Wi-Fi access here in New York. And one of the things that I asked one of our elected officials, Gail Brewer and Helen Rosenthal, is there a way to expand the signal from the link discs that are built throughout the city, because the city has a contract. So I don't understand, why can't they utilize that resource and expand the signal so that people can access Wi-Fi? Because I've heard stories where a lot of my students are standing outside or, somewhere, wherever they can grab a signal to do their homework, whether it's by McDonald's, in front of it, anywhere, and that's ridiculous, We are a state and a city that, we have corporations here like Jeff Bezos and others that have billions of dollars, and they should provide funding to help our education system.
Well, you got a big amen from me on that one, Polly, and I certainly believe that getting some support from government for our community networks. been funded by community folks, such as
Exactly.
other resident groups. We're about almost out of time. Diana, do you have some parting comments for us about the essentiality of broadband and free access, particularly in this particular environment, COVID-19 environment?
All I want to say is that we just have to look at the continued disparity that we're facing. It doesn't stop with just health, economics. It goes on to technology. We've been lacking in this, and there's something that we must find. We have to find a way to break this disparity and catch up. We can't continue lagging. We must. This is what our goal should be, to find out how to bridge this gap.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We've been speaking with Polly Spain and Diana Blackwell, two dynamic public housing and community leaders in Harlem and the Upper West Side. Thank you both for joining us on this panel.
And thank you for having us.
Of course.
Okay.
And stay tuned. There's more interesting conversation.
Okay.
I'm going to turn it back to Greg Shetton, who's going to moderate the next panel on how are we using community networks during COVID-19. And I'm going to join in and have a few comments as well. But over to you, Greg.
Thank you, Stu. Let me turn my video back on. So here we'll talk about the here and now. We have a great panel with 4 people, so I'll take only a second to introduce each of them. First, we have Ethel Velez. Ethel is the chair of the Manhattan North District Council of Presidents and president of the James Weldon Johnson Houses Resident Association, a longtime advocate for public housing residents in New York City and around the world. Bob Ponce is the co-founder and director of the Harlem Emergency Information Network, a community-based team of emergency and radio communications professionals that provides emergency preparedness, mitigation, and recovery information to the Harlem community. Next, we have Wally Abdul Noor. Wally is the co-founder and senior radio manager for the Harlem Emergency and Information Network and the South Bronx Emergency Radio Network. Both of these are comprised of community-based emergency radio communication specialists providing emergency preparedness, mitigation, recovery information for their communities. Last, Stu, since you've already introduced yourself, I will say you need no further introduction.
Well, thank you.
So, talking about what community networks are doing during this COVID-19 pandemic, it's hitting us hard. I'll start with Ethel Velez. Please tell us what you're thinking. Ethel, do we have you? Well, since I've got visuals on Bob and Wally and Stu, I will come back to Ethel and go to Bob.
Okay, I'm here.
Tell us what you're thinking about how community networks are being used and how we can use them during pandemics and public emergencies and the like.
Well, one of the things that community networks have is we have trust. Our community networks are built up over time and through relationships. And so one of the things in an age where there's a lot of noise and misinformation and disinformation, a lot of people have just found themselves just besides themselves, just trying to figure out what's going on. And so community networks such as Harlem Emergency Network, South Bronx Emergency Network, the things that Stu is doing with digital divide partnerships, we all work together. A matter of fact, as we're on, we normally have a Tuesday night Zoom call. So right now we're streaming this Zoom into our Zoom so that our members can hear what's going on. Same way on Monday mornings when we do regular radio checks for Harlem Emergency Network, Stu brings those into some of the streaming that he's doing, NYCHA houses, and also on YouTube Live. And so we've been doing that pretty much throughout the pandemic every Monday morning. So we've created these federations of trusted networks, and we are doing the same thing now. South Bronx Emergency Network is just getting started this year, but we are sharing information with them. And so it gives us an opportunity to work together, utilize technology tools to get the word to more people. And so, and we also collaborate with WHCR 90.3 FM radio station out of City College. And so we've used each and every one of these platforms. In addition, Harlem Emergency Network, we have a texting platform, we have a smartphone radio platform, we have our members who are studying for their amateur radio licenses. So we try to use every communication platform that we can to be able to share information and collect information during an emergency.
Thanks, Bob. And that's a great point. The community networks have trust because they come from the community, which is not something you get from your local mega provider. Stu, since Bob mentioned your name, I'll turn to you next.
Okay, well, thank you, Greg. As Bob said, Harlem Emergency Network and our group Digital Divide Partners, we came together after Superstorm Sandy in 2011, 2012, when we realized that there was no on-the-ground communication platform to keep folks in Harlem informed about what was going on locally in the community. So we created WHCR Emergency Broadcast Team to be a communications vehicle using both the radio station as well as internet streaming. And then also Wale Abdul Noor, who is our real radio genius of the group, brought handheld mobile radios to the overall mix of our communications portfolio. So we began to use and integrate the mobile radios into our communication mix, along with the streaming and the free Wi-Fi access points and the FM radio station. And we've also started doing low power FM emergency broadcasting, both at Grant houses and at Johnson houses. And we hope to spread that around a little bit. This is under the FCC Part 15, it's called, where we are permitted to broadcast low power FM within a small radius, really within the radius of the housing community. But it's there, and it's emergency. It's tied into what we're doing on our streaming platform, and we can also tie it into our two-way radio network. So we've got multiple redundant platforms, community-based, all controlled by folks on the ground. As Bob said, it's so critical that the community folks, the community's in charge of this. It's not some fancy experts coming in. The community has come to us and said, this is what we need, and we're helping to put the tools in their hands. So that's kind of the long and short of my involvement. Emergency communications was really introduced to me by Wale Abdul Noor. So I would like to hear from him for a bit. Wale.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for being here and inviting me. One of the things that in emergency management that was found out was when they took a study of the places in the world that had great disasters like tsunamis and earthquakes and hurricanes and even terrorism. When they wanted to find out the places that recovered and had resiliency, they found that it wasn't about the money, it wasn't about the training, it wasn't about the equipment, it wasn't about the politics. What it was about was about the community. That's what they found out. So by us now, like Bob started out with the trust, and like Stu showed the expansion, and this is the community coming together. Even in this pandemic, I'm basically up in the Bronx, and if last week Governor Cuomo, he stated that there was one place in the Bronx that was the worst, which is where I am in Morrisania. He made that statement. And the only community response was coming from the community. When, I mean, okay, you had responses for ambulances and for individuals, but giving out food to people that needed to eat and PPEs and gloves and all of that, that was done by the community. And so that's, what would I say, the basic community. But now what we're talking about now is bringing the community into the digital and the electronic and communication world. And I think that once, maybe in a year or two, once these networks that Stu and Bob and Doug and there'll be other people connect together, this will be a greater asset to recovery and resiliency than the government can provide, because there are great resources in the community, but everybody's like in their own little silo. And when we break down those silos with this type of meetings and this type of togetherness and this type of community, and it really could only happen like this, because you're not going to be able to get a symposium. I'd venture to say that everybody on this call is in miles away from each other. And on a night like tonight, you probably couldn't get this group together normally and the interest together. But by having this electronic network that we have, this internet and radios and all of these different things, this is a game changer. This is a game changer. You're going to see unity throughout the city. And it's not only going to be for emergencies. It's going to be for every day. It's going to be for crime prevention. It's going to be for, like Diane has said, we have to find a way to come from behind. This is the way. This is the path. Because now you can bring in people from various parts of the city. A lot of information is being brought out, and even those that can't directly get internet access, they can get information because they know people that do have internet access. So this is the way. This is the way. This is a game changer.
Thank you, Wally. That is very helpful. Very, very good words on this point. And I have a lot of empathy for what you're doing. I used to have a Class 3 radio license when there was such a thing.
I had one of those too.
I was president of my college radio station, and
Me
also
too.
my wife works in the heart of Mott Haven at 135th Street and Brook Avenue. So the South Bronx is real.
Mm-hmm.
So Ethel, let's see if we have Ethel Velez from Johnson Houses and the Association of Presidents. Not not, but anyway, Ethel, do we have you? Because we did not have you before. Well, it seems like we have Ethel on the board, but
Yeah. Greg, let me just say a very brief thing about Ethel. I don't want to speak for her. I wish she could join in, but she came to our group a couple of months ago, right as the COVID was hitting, and her particular community where Johnston Houses is in East Harlem, at the time was one of the, or if not the hardest hit zip code in the entire city. Folks were just dropping like flies in her community. And she came up with a concept of Broadband Cadets, where we would train local folks in emergency communication, equip them with mobile radios and streaming devices and appropriate PPE, and have them monitor and check on residents in the community. So this is something that we're hoping to really implement in a really systematic way. We've kind of been doing it on an ad hoc basis, but we really want to really build up this cadre of folks of Broadband Cadets. And this is something that Ethel brought to us. And we hope we're going to be able to collaborate with her and other folks in public housing as well, and make this a reality, particularly during this pandemic where it's so critical.
thank you, Stu. Clock on the wall tells me it's time to go to the next panel. So I will thank panelists, Bob, Wally, Stuart, Ethel. We've heard about you. So back to you, Stu.
Okay.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Wally, for that eloquence. And thank you all for the work that you guys are doing in emergency communications in particular. We now turn to our last panel, and we're bringing back Joyce Adewami from the New York City Multicultural Festival producer. And we also have Brother Leroy with us. Brother Leroy is a longtime journalist and radio producer based out of Harlem. And he is the producer and host of our much acclaimed program, The Wisdom Table, started almost 4 years ago out of Johnson Houses. Brother Leroy really pioneered some of the community radio work that we're doing. So welcome, Brother Leroy.
And thank you. And I'm looking at, I guess I'm all right.
Okay, your audio is a little muted, Brother Leroy. If you could work on getting closer to your mic, that'd be good. We also have with us Brother Rick Young. Welcome, Rick. Rick is a longtime producer and host of his own program, What's in Your Hand. I think he's done over 900 episodes, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Rick?
That's correct. That is correct.
Long time, and interestingly enough, Rick's programming is about self-improvement and motivation, self-motivation. So both of these guys have been long-time radio producers and in traditional radio, and then over the last 3 or 4 years, they have collaborated with us on our streaming radio projects at Johnson Houses, at Grant Houses. And I just want to talk with the three of you, and Joyce very much involved in African arts and healing arts. And from where I sit, Community Networks is an incredible platform that allows for the expression of ideas and opinions and activities that you would not normally see on traditional media. So maybe I'll start with you, Brother Leroy, given your seniority and your long history in bringing these kinds of issues to the fore. Tell us a little bit, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the Wisdom Table and how that got started. Let's start there.
I'm sorry. I didn't hear what you said. I was talking.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Wisdom Table and how you got started with that? And also, can you get a little closer to your microphone?
Okay, you can hear me now.
Yes, much better.
Okay, great. And starting out, I'd like to borrow some of the dialogue that Brother Wally had. He mentioned 2 or 3 things. He talked about great resource, and he talked about game changers. And I'm going to use that in this part of the presentation, because in working with Digital Divide, there's the untapped resource of the housing developments that we have tapped into by way of the radio programs, the radio stations that have set up. So the Wisdom Table was begun at the James Weldon Johnson houses, and we have been able to corral and enlist the participation of, oh man.
Brother Leroy, you there?
He appears to be frozen in time.
Yeah, okay. So, Sister Joyce, let me throw it over to you, and while we're waiting for Leroy to come back with us. Tell us a little bit about some of the cultural arts activities that you're involved in, and what kind of role community networks might play in helping to bring that to the fore.
Okay, thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me. I should have said that earlier, but I've been jumping from Zoom to Zoom, so it just feels like a long Zoom all day. But also, I want to thank you for this opportunity, this community networking, because for someone like myself who works in the community, we need things like this. So one of the programs that my organization, which is called New York African Chorus Ensemble, one of the programs that we do is the New York City Multicultural Festival. And, we try the best that we can to promote through flyers, to Facebook and so forth and so on. But with your program, this project, community networking, this is where we need to be, because the program is for the community. We are teaching our young people about culture. We're teaching them things that they would not read in books, because the education is so skewed that sometimes children only think that there is them and then there's white people, not knowing that this whole city is home to people from the whole wide world. So by showcasing the New York City Multicultural Festival, organizing New York City Multicultural Festival, we are letting people see that these are cultural expressions of people from all over the world, and these cultural expressions are also, they're valid, and people are meeting each other. I've heard people say, I never knew there were so many different cultures in New York City. We hold this festival on St. Nicholas Avenue from 141st to 145th, and again at Jackie Robinson Park. We've been doing this for the past 10 years, but we still hear people in the community who said that they'd never heard about it, and we spend a lot of money on promotion, So that's one of the things that we do. We also assist in creating entrepreneurs, because when you do festivals, you also have vendors. And this community, we know, is a low-income community, but there are many people who make things and they want to learn how to sell those things. So we help them in getting a street vendor license. But because of COVID, we've moved everything online. The festival is online. It's going to take place on Saturday, this coming Saturday, and June 6th. We've also moved online the whole concept of vendor. We're going to be helping our vendors in this community to have an online presence. So this is where you all come in, because by having an online presence, they can continue with their business. And these are seniors who want to make a little bit of money. And they feel that, they felt that because of the COVID, their business is over, but we wanted to show them, no, the business does not have to be over. They can still make money, but now pivot online using community network to let everybody know who's doing what and how they can get their products to them. So I thank you all for this great work that you're doing.
Thank you, Joyce, and thank you for the great work that you're doing. And now let's hear from Brother Rick Young. What's in your hand tonight there, Brother Rick?
Stu, I only have a minute. 60 seconds in it. Forced upon me, can't refuse it, didn't seek it, didn't choose it, but it's up to me to use it. I must suffer if I lose it, give account if I abuse it, but it's a tiny little minute. So use your minutes wisely, Brother Stu.
Okay, take another minute there, Brother Rick. Take another minute.
That was Benjamin E. Mays.
Okay.
First of all, I'd like to say the reason why I sit in this seat, because two of my heroes that are here now, Brother Wally and Dr. Leroy, Professor Leroy. That's the reason why I sit in this seat. These guys were their leadership skills and their mentorship. And I've done over 900 shows, as you said. I wouldn't have done one show, radio show. I'm a boxer. I come from the boxing world. They gave me an opportunity. There's a lot of talent out there. We need to find that talent. There's other Ricky Youngs out there that would be great. Some of them are standing on the corner. Some of them haven't found themselves yet, but they're out there and they have potential.
Tell our audience briefly about your whole concept of what's in your hand and what your show is about, Rick, because it's so powerful.
Well, I went to, because of Professor Leroy, Dr. Leroy, he took me to WACR, we connected, and he took me to Brother Wally. And I have one of my favorite uncles' name was Wally. So it was like, I was like, wow, I'm like home. So I started doing segments on Harlem 411 with Brother Wally. So Wally said, you have to come up with a name for your show, for your segment. I was like, I didn't know. I thought about it. I remember watching Gil Noble, Like It Is. He had a powerful segment of Adam Clayton Powell. And at the end of the documentary, Adam Clayton Powell did this sermon called What's in Your Hand? And I just said, what about what's in your hand? Wally said, yeah, that sounds good, yeah. Now, what's in your hand has been, it's been powerful. It has helped a lot of people and changed a lot of lives. We will never know how many people that I have touched. And it's because of Brother Wally and Professor Leroy. Because of those two men, as I said, I sit in this seat and I've touched a lot of people's lives because of them.
Mm-hmm. Now, Brother Rick, you're also, if I'm not mistaken, didn't you grow up in grant houses? And I know
I grew up in grant houses from 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I became a professional boxer in Grant. So I've seen a lot of things happen growing up and seen a lot of changes. But I think this opportunity here is incredible. It just blows my mind. When I walked into the studio and I saw the studio in Grant, it blew my mind.
Mm-hmm. I mean, no,
I've been here all my life, pretty much.
Okay. So it's in your mind, that was something unique to see in public housing, was it?
It was very unique. And, you know, me coming from WACR and seeing that, it was very unique because I had never seen something like that before. To see that something like that was possible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was almost like I was in heaven when I saw it.
Okay, well, we're winding down. I wish Brother Leroy could come back. Leroy, if you can hear us, try and come back in. He is certainly the sage of our group and the senior fellow, if you will.
Absolutely.
Yeah. He's, as Rick said, he's one of his mentors, and Brother Leroy was very instrumental in us coming together with myself, my business partner and Digital Divide Partners, Doug Frazier, and Miss Ethel Velez over at Johnson Houses, where we started the Wisdom Table, which was a coming together of folks from the community talking about issues and concerns of their own. And what we knew, but what really just became clear, there's so much wisdom and so much knowledge right in the community, in the folks in the community, particularly in some of the, if I can use the word senior, I'm putting myself in that group, some of the senior folks, so much wisdom, so much knowledge. And the wisdom table brought that together and brought that out. And Brother Leroy saw that. He was the producer and host and helped shape that program and really helped put us on the whole path of community streamcasting and community radio as a really vibrant application that folks would embrace, and as a way to get folks to connect with the internet and as a way to get folks to use the internet to communicate. And I want to thank Brother Leroy for that, even though he's not here to join us. And it looks like one more participant before we go, if he can come in, Brother Carlton Davis, who is the president of the Grant Houses, General Grant Houses Resident Association, and big proponent of community networks and community ownership of media platforms to get the word out. Brother Davis helped lead the whole effort to create the Grant Houses community radio station that Rick talked about, and Greg has been there. He's done a couple roundtable discussions from there. I think Polly and Diana have been there as well. Since the pandemic, we have had to move our whole community operation to a virtual sphere. So we are still doing what we did in the studios, in the physical studios, but we're doing it virtually and with platforms like this and other streaming platforms. And in some ways, we are doing even more work because, as I don't know who said it, I think Wally said it, how hard it is to get folks together physically on any kind of consistent basis. But with this technology, it's easier to bring people together to have these kinds of conversations. And we've been doing that with our community partners, with Diana Blackwell at Fred Samuel Houses. Diana has been doing a weekly report on food distribution and other things that she's doing in the community. Signing up folks for the census. You want to talk about that real briefly, Diana? We got a few more minutes.
Oh, I just want to let you know it's a great opportunity to combine food and the work of the census by letting the people know if you do your census there with an actual census person, we actually give them a fresh direct box. And on the days that we have abundance, we give anyone that refers someone who needs their census done. And because we're in this pandemic and we're, food is kind of scarce, fresh food is kind of scarce, we're able to combine the both of those together. And we've increased our numbers. I got a great report Saturday that it doesn't seem like much, but we went from 49% complete to 51 point something complete on Saturday. And a lot of it's contributed to the fact that we're doing it right there in Harlem, right where you can come in, do your census, takes about 7 minutes with some assistance, and then you go home with a fresh direct box.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, that report and many others that we're doing with our community news gathering service can be seen and listened to and viewed on our website, our community news website, which is safeandsmart.org, safeandsmart.org. Brother Carlton Davis, are you with us? Do you have a few words before we finish up for us? Carlton, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you fine. We hear you fine. We're kind of winding up, but we wanted to hear from you. We've been talking about community networks and how important they are in the community, and some of the things that we've been able to do with communication platforms controlled by folks on the ground. So I mentioned a little bit about what you were doing at Grant, and if you could share a few words with us, we appreciate it.
Well, I know as far as using the system that we have, it's working out very well. The walkie-talkies, we got to get that. We got to get a move on that, because we was able to contact our staff while they went building
to building, door to door. There's no instantaneously who needs help for the seniors, and oh man, it's incredible. It's incredible. The recordings of the walkie-talkies are crystal clear. I mean, the whole electronic system that and technology that we're using now is absolutely phenomenal. It's new. People are feeling great. You know, the staffers is what I'm talking about. They're coming out. People coming out and participating and want to know more about, you know, the radio station, what else it has to offer. It's so much. I just can't wait till we have time where we can actually step in the studio and even now, even remotely, they speak on it. But, you know, just any way we contact, I just can't wait till we get things pushed off the ground where people could really get a feel of what's happening as far as using this technology.
Okay, well, thank you, Carlton. We're about winding up here. I want to go around the horn quickly, a minute or so. Any final comments? Maybe Polly, do you have any final comments?
Yeah, again, I just want to stress how important it is, the work that you have done. And I hope that, you know, you have the opportunity to continue to work with us. And we thank you for being a visionary, as I said earlier, because now it's really, you know, paying off in this pandemic. So, you know, it's helped us a lot.
Thank you, Diana.
I hope that this conversation is a first step stool to going from conversation to reality, to, you know, not just a vision, but to actually be building what we really want to happen.
Mm-hmm. Sister Joyce.
Once again, thank you for this opportunity. And also I want to piggyback on what Sister Diane said. We need more of such conversations. There are many resources in the community whose voice we have not heard that needs to be heard. We do need to communicate with one another so we can figure out how to survive this pandemic and after this pandemic, because it's a new shift, it's a new world. We've got to create this new world. We can't let someone create it for us. That world has to be culturally sensitive to us. And the only way it can be is if we come together and talk about what we want to see, what we want to have, and then join together to make that happen. And this is a very important tool to ensure that that happens in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Brother Rick.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna use the words of Dr. Leroy. This is a classroom. And I think each one of us that spoke today is qualified to teach classes. I think we should teach classes even amongst each other and let that build up and let that grow. I would love to see that.
Okay, and Brother Barack, any final comments from East Africa?
Thank you, Stuart, and everyone. Very interesting conversation that definitely should be taken a notch higher. Community networks will definitely be the new normal going forward. And let's do whatever it takes to connect the unconnected within our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barack. Greg, you've got the last word.
Thank you, Stu, and thank you, everybody. This has been a very enlightening conversation or series of conversations. I think this conversation points out that while connectivity is essential, it's only part of the solution. And one of the things that I think sets Stu and Doug in the work that they do apart from many others is their emphasis on content and on usage of the network when it's in place, you know, such as the radio, such as the walkie-talkies, such as you know, other elements. You know, connectivity without a device, without content, without local community content, you know, is a step in the right direction. But it's great to take several steps. So as I see us all moving forward, you know, the community needs to build the network. It needs to use the network. It needs to use the network to build community. And ultimately, it will take back the internet, which is supposed to be free and for everybody. And that will be taking us much closer to what the vision of the internet is supposed to be for everybody. The internet is for everyone. Thank you, Stu.
Okay. Thank you, Greg, for those final words. And thank you all panelists for joining us in what I hope will just be the first of many symposiums on community networks here in New York City. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.